I'm Lexis Burns, student at Jackson State University. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Kenyatta Young, a special education teacher here at Raymond High School.
Okay, Ms.Young, I want to ask you a few questions pertaining to special education. Can you tell me why did you choose to become a special education teacher?
Originally, I was a speech path major, and we had to choose a minor. And with speech pathology, the minor is closely related to the speech path major is special education. So we learned a lot of things in the speech path major that was they kind of went hand in hand because students who receive speech services they fall under a special education umbrella. So um, once I earned enough credits toward my minor, I actually kept going because I got pretty interested in it. And I wanted to help people, so I like the therapy side, the idea of doing speech therapy, but I also I kind of wanted to I wanted to get into it to I could get into the school system, and I could also originally it was a little bit easier as well for me to go into the master's program to start working on my master's in special education as opposed to go off and start on my master's in speech. But once I started working in that area, I found it to be it was rewarding. It was pretty um, interesting to see how students kind of coped and how they made you help them make how should I say, you kind of help them to make you give them accommodations or whatever, but they also kind of learn how to compensate for their shortcomings, and it's kind of interesting to see how they kind of compensate in one area when they're short in another one. So it became something that was very interesting to me.
Okay. And can you tell me some of the ways you stay current with the special education practices?
Um, we do a lot of in-house trainings, and they also send you. I get lots of mail about conferences here at the school. They mail them to the school about different conferences in regards to different disabilities. So I go to workshops, and our district provides lots of training. They come when they get something down from the Mississippi Department of Education, if it's something that we need to know, if it's a change that comes about that we need to start doing, following a different procedure or whatever, they let us know. And we do in-house trainings on that. Sometimes they bring people in from the State Department to train us, and sometimes we go out to, we sign up and we go out to different workshops and trainings. But and also just you kind of collaborate with people. You can collaborate with people inside and outside of the district because sometimes the policies and the procedures statewide they're the same, but from district to district, sometimes they do things a little bit different. So sometimes you can pick up on a piece of information and it's something that you may be able to use that you hear about it from someone else. You think, oh, that may work good with my students, or you bring it to the table as a suggestion, or and you just kind of figure out what works. But as far as staying current, we do have several in-house trainings, and we are allowed to sign up for workshops outside. And if anything comes down from the Mississippi from the State Department, our district office also makes it a practice of meeting with us and letting us know, so we can make sure that we're doing everything with, inside the federal guidelines and state guidelines.
Okay. Could you also tell me how have you encouraged parental involvement in your students' learning?
Um, with us, you are first of all, anytime that you meet and make a decision on a student with a disability, it has to be a community decision, and a parent is a vital part of the committee. You really you always invite parents to meetings, and you allow them input on the decisions that you make about the child's education. So they can choose to come or not to come, but we always invite them. And then also we contact parents and we let them know about progress. And you try to contact parents to let them know good things too, so that every time you're making contact, it's not always about something negative. But as far as my students go, my students are on a regular diploma track, standard diploma track. So they have to pass all state tests, and they have to also meet the requirements that any other student would have to meet to get a diploma. So any little mouse or anything that we see that's gonna get in the way of that, or anything that they've done to meet a requirement, we contact the parent. Hey, they're doing well. They passed this test, or hey, we need to work on them. We need to remediate them on this, that, or the other. So we keep the parent involved, because sometimes, I mean, with any student, it's not just a student with special needs. You're with them 8 hours a day, which is a big chunk of the day. But as far as one class may go, you have, now we're on a block schedule, so 90 minutes. And you encourage the parent to encourage their student at home to also spend some time outside the classroom, because if you have whether you have a disability or not, you can't just, when you see the information during a class period, if you don't look at it again until the next time, then you're not you're not really familiar with it. So with a student, and even to say that, my students, if I have them outside of class for tutorials, so this is something that I encourage parents to do, go over with them so that they'll be more comfortable participating inside the classroom. So you encourage them to kind of, to not over prepare them, but to work with them to kind of, so that it will lower the anxiety level, so to speak, a little bit, if you kind of work with them a little bit outside of class. And that just can't be done at home. It has to be, I mean, at school it has to be done at home too. So you just encourage them to use the parents to use any outside resources they have. You encourage them to use computer programs at home. You encourage them to ask questions. You invite them to meetings. You invite them in anything, anytime that something is going on at the school. So you just kind of have to, you really have to build a really good rapport with the parents, because a lot of the things, the correspondence that goes back and forth with you, you have to have their signatures for things, for meetings, and for their notices and everything. So and sometimes you may have to call them at work. Hey, um, we need you. I'm gonna send home a notice, and this is what this is for. And if this date is not good for you, I mean, because you have to communicate with them, because sometimes if you know on the front end that a date is not gonna work, you can go ahead and change it, and it takes a lot of time out of you having to resend notice home. So if you need to make a decision, if the committee needs to make a decision on a child, you need to hold a meeting. you it's best if you have open lines of communication with the parent, because sometimes that speeds the process up. Because if I know that you can come or you can't come on this date before I even send home a notice, sometimes I talk to my parents to say, is this a good time? And we set a date and time before I even send it home. So instead of sending it home and then that date won't work, and then you have to send it back, and then we have to choose another date. So you just it's very important that teachers have a good relationship with their parents in general. But when you have a student with a special need, those parents have to be more involved, because they make more decisions about what goes on. They actually sit in, and you can't make any changes to their child's IEP, unless you invite that parent and give that parent notice, and that parent participates. So that's pretty much how we do
Okay. How do you motivate your students to persevere with challenging assignments?
it. A lot of times, you find out, you know what their shortcomings are, because it's documented, they've been tested. But you find out what they're good at, and you encourage them. A lot of times the students themselves they will compensate in one area for their shortcomings. So like, if I most of the time my students are weaker in reading than they are in math, and I make sure to tell them, well, you're real strong in math. And even though, it may be some things that they can't, it may be one area of reading that they can they may be able to listen well and repeat things back to you. They may not be able to read it from the paper, but from a textbook. But if they can listen to you and give it back, so you just kind of have to know your students. You have to interact with them enough to know what they're good at, so that you can point out what they're good at. And if you build them up in one area, you kind of still encourage them to work in the other. So I said, oh, you're real good at this, we just have to work on that. And that's something that I pride myself on, being really good with that positive reinforcement. So I try to make sure I tell them what they're good at, so that when I have to get down and tell them, hey, what we need to work on, they don't take that as hard. You see what I'm saying? Because the overall thing about children in general is not just special education students. If they know that you care, then they'll listen and they'll take your advice. They'll take what you say and they'll use it. They won't be offended. If you can just about, I'm not gonna say whatever you want to say, but if they know that you care about them, then they'll work for you. So I encourage them, I make sure to point out what they're good at, so that when I tell them what they need to work on, that they're not then they don't feel bad about themselves.
Mm. What methods do you use to encourage students to explore learning opportunities?
Um, One thing that you have to do as a special education teacher is to make sure that you're not giving them. You have to support them, but you have to make sure that you're not spoon feeding them, and that you're not doing it for them. So a lot of times, you have to make sure that you don't give too much support, because sometimes a lot of students, they kind of want you to almost do the work for them. So the thing that you have to do to help them explore their own learning opportunities, you have to kind of lead them to where they need to be, and then you have to encourage them to do some research or to do some things on their own. And a lot of times I do that by questioning. Now, you just ask them, okay, now remember this? You remember when we did this, or remember when we got to this point and you told me this? So you kind of, one thing that I do, I lead them with questions, and I allow them to kind of figure things out on their own. But a lot of now, because we're in such a technological age, this year we went to BYOD, bring your own device. We try, they can, which most students, they enjoy the idea of being able to use their phone at school. So you can tell them, well, look it up. Look it up on your phone, or if you can find this on your phone, or and you encourage them to go to the library. You write them library passes. You just reward them for doing good things. When okay, did you if you go ahead and you research and you complete your own assignment, I encourage them to get as far as they can get on their own without asking for my help. Okay, so once you explain something, and I just tell them, well, do the part that you can do first. And a lot of times I tell them that when I was a student, I wasn't I'm not, I didn't have a disability, but a lot of times I found answers in questions. A lot of times if you study, you teach them strategies, and once you teach them strategies, you can encourage them to use those strategies to learn on their own. So that's a lot of what you do, and you, like I say, you have to know the students. But the best way to encourage them to explore their own learning is to teach them strategies, so they'll have things in place, so that when they don't know something, or when they come to something that they don't quite understand, they'll know how to find the answer on their own. And you encourage them to do research, and it's also good to make them comfortable enough to ask questions, and when they don't know about something. Because I'm an inclusion teacher, my students tend to, in a regular setting, they kind of shy away from asking questions. They tend to want to be quiet and just blend in, because they don't want people to know that they don't know. A lot of times when I see that they're struggling with something, I'll ask the question as if I need the help, so that everybody, and a lot of times there are regular students in there that don't know too, but you kind of encourage, you just want to make them feel comfortable to ask questions. You want to give them strategies, so that when they don't know something, they can kind of find out, and they don't just stop, excuse me, stop or quit.
So, as an inclusion teacher, you try to keep that affective filter open where they open up to you.
Exactly. And my students are they're comfortable with me, and sometimes they when you come inside a classroom, some of them don't want other students to see you helping them because they feel like the students may know that they're in special education, but some of them welcome it. So what I try to do, best practice is to make I help all of the students, so when I have to help my students, they don't feel like I'm singling them out. So you just kind of make yourself a fixture in the classroom where all the students know that you'll help any of them. So when your students need help, they don't feel like they have a they're stigmatized by you helping all of them. So and it's normally it's a pretty comfortable situation, but you do have some kids that are just self-conscious about being identified. So you just kind of have to, and sometimes you just have to kind of peek over their shoulder and know you have to kind of monitor. You have to really try to notice what they're having problems with so that you can help them outside the classroom, because sometimes they don't want you to help them inside of the general setting, but they'll come to you later and they'll ask you for help. So you just kind of make note of what you saw them struggling with, or what if it's something that you notice that they had difficulties with, or something that they didn't finish. You say, well, come on, we need to work on this, because you noticed that they had a problem with it. But a lot of times they'll get comfortable enough to ask for help, and those who want to know, and sometimes they want to know so badly that they work really hard at at kind of overcoming whatever it is that they don't that they're not really good at.
Okay. We know that paperwork and assessments for special education teachers, it's more paperwork than other teachers. Can you kind of tell me, how do you regularly assess the progress of your students?
Ooh,
I know you mentioned IEP. Can you kind of tell us what that is?
yes. There can be an extensive amount of paperwork that comes along with special education, because um, there are laws and regulations that kind of guide their education. You have to make sure that you have those things in order. Um, it's really, I'm not going to tell you it's easy. It's very difficult to balance helping the students and keeping the paperwork in order. So you have to try to monitor it daily. You have to, one way that you have to collaborate with the teachers to make sure that the students that in between, because some students I may see on a daily basis, some of them I may not see on a daily basis, but you have to use the computer. A lot of times, if I'm not doing inclusion with a student on a particular subject, I pull up their grades and SCI to make sure that they're not slipping. And as far as the progress monitoring goes, you do that generally once every 9 weeks is what they're calling up the 9 weeks now are quarters, because we're on the block schedule. So you generally do that once every 9 weeks. But when you get to the 9 week period, you have to have documentation to kind of guide you on how they did, because you're really supposed to collect work samples from you can collect work samples from the general education teacher to kind of, if they match up with their goals, or you can if they have a tutorial and you work with them outside of class, you can kind of collect your own data and give them assignments that are directly related to goals. But a lot of times their goals can be embedded in those general ed classes. But if they're um, really far behind as far as their grade level, just say I may have a student in geometry and they're performing on a fourth grade level in math. You may have to go back and create some assignments, or find something to work with them on to assess those particular goals, so that when it's time to monitor their progress, you have work samples and you have something that you can compare. You can kind of work from. But the paperwork, it can get overwhelming, especially if you don't stay on top of it. But because there's so many different aspects that you have to monitor, you sometimes you're monitoring behavior. Sometimes you're monitoring students who if they have attention deficit, it's hard for them to stay on task. So sometimes it's not that they can't do the work, it's that they don't do it and they get behind on it. And you have to try to make sure that they're keeping up in the regular classroom. And this is the thing because the students who are on the diploma track, they have to do everything that everybody else does to get their diploma. So in doing it is difficult because you have to make sure that they're not only passing those classes, but that you're doing something, you're giving them something to remediate them and assist them on the goals that you outlined in the IEP, or that were outlined in the IEP if you didn't help write those goals. So when you get to the end of the 9 weeks, you have to have some type of work sample. You have to pull something to make sure that you're able to monitor the progress that they've made on the goals that they have in the IEP. Because in some cases, it may be something. Um, I have some students who took Algebra 2 last year. Well, this year they're not taking a math. So if they have a math goal, I'm solely responsible for presenting them with math instruction and giving them assignments to kind of monitor where they are, along with making sure that they keep up in the regular courses and that they are passing tests and all of that. So um, what you have to do now is we are encouraging a lot of our students to take ACT. So we're doing ACT prep work with it because they can, if they pass, if they haven't passed a subject area test, now they're able to substitute, may be able to substitute part of a ACT score in for that. So you just kind of have to know what their needs are, and you have to kind of look at the big picture as well as all the little bitty parts that go into it to make sure that they are meeting the goals that they need in the regular ed classes, but that you're not. It's kind of hard to balance because the remediation part, it doesn't take, and you do have to be remediated in order to meet those big goals. But a lot of times, what your parents want to know is, are they passing the class? They're not so much concerned with them, with the, well, I'm not gonna say they're not concerned with it, but and it gets their attention more so than you telling them they're 2 or 3 grade levels behind because they want to know that the students are passing. So you kind of have to balance what's important because the IEP does help guide the instruction and what their educational needs are, but they're also trying to fight through and pass these classes and pass tests so they can get a regular diploma too. So you have to balance what they need as well as trying to stay within the guidelines and make sure that you're following what's outlined in the IEP.
Okay. In conclusion, is there any advice you would like to give to those teachers that are seeking to be a special education teacher?
My advice would be um, to you have to be very organized, um, and that's something that I was very organized, but in the run of a day or in the run, sometimes you never get a chance to start on the things that you need to do because something may come up, and if a student says, "Well, I need help on this," you stop and you kind of you have to make adjustments out of it. So that's one thing that I would advise: be flexible because you may not always get to do what you think that what you have planned to do. Sometimes those things take a back seat to you know what's present and what's facing you right then. If a student needs help, you may have a meeting or something to come up, but you be flexible. Try to make sure that you're looking at the big picture because you have to follow IEP. That's one thing that you can't overlook, but you also have to help meet the needs of the students in other areas. You have to make sure that you have a good working relationship with the general education teachers because some teachers are territorial when you come inside their classroom. they don't want to feel like you're taking over. So sometimes that can be a battle. But if you make sure that you build a rapport with the students and that you have a good working relationship with your coworkers, it makes it so much easier. Because sometimes you 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 can get looked at as an assistant when you're out when you're also a certified teacher, but the general ed teacher is on the forefront. So if you the more that you know and the more that you can help out in the classroom, and if you can kind of co-teach, and the students, they if they can go to you just as well as they can go to the general ed teacher, it makes it a lot easier for them in the classroom, for your special needs students in the classroom, as well as for you, because like I said, if students know that you can help all of them, then the special needs student won't be as reluctant to ask you for help, because they'll feel like, well, everybody knows she'll help everybody, so it's not going to be such a stigma placed on me when I ask for help. So form good relationships with your parents, your co-workers. Be able to encourage your students and make them feel comfortable. Be flexible, because in a run of a day, you may not get to do anything that you have planned. And try to stay organized with your paperwork. You really have to learn how to balance servicing your students and doing your paperwork. That's something that's getting really hard to do, because it seems like the paperwork is growing, but the students still need your help. So it's you find a balance between the paperwork and the services, and build good relationships with them. That's basically.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Young.
You're so welcome.